Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by Pooper Scooper youngster Kevin Cunningham. I had to throw it out there, Kevin. Just had to. It's kind of that's the way your day has been going. So how are you?
Well, my day's actually been going very well. I got called off work in the morning. That happened last night, so I knew today was going to be a good day. I had to get a few errands done. Got a story out of that. I got a story to tell you about yesterday, but that's all off the air. I'm not going to get into those stories now. But Pooper Scooper, as far as that's concerned, I just picked up after a couple dogs, so that's where that nickname is coming to Troy's mind from. But
hey, you're doing your civic duty, cleaning up after your dogs. I appreciate that. I have two dogs. I clean up their messes too. I can't stand when people walk their dog and their dog does their business in my front yard and they leave it. I can't stand it. I was cutting my grass a couple weeks ago, ran over a pile of dog crap in my front yard. I'm like, my dogs don't go out in the front yard. They go in the backyard. I'm like, oh, come on now. Pick up your crap. Literally, pick up your crap.
Right. Would agree. But today, obviously, going to be talking about Big Ten stuff. The AP poll was released yesterday, 2 days ago. I think it was 2 days ago. My days are getting mixed up these last few days. So much crap has happened, I guess, to stick with that word. But the AP poll, I'm going to talk about that. 4 Big Ten teams ranked in the top 25 and up close to the top, which we figured. James Franklin got his new deal, and an Indiana incoming freshman for the 2017 season was ruled ineligible because basically the school messed up what requirements he had to meet, I'm assuming in high school. I'm not sure if further details have come out. I'll have to look more into it as the show goes on. But an Indiana kid basically cannot play this year because the school messed him over. And the NCAA basically said no to Indiana trying to appeal the process that they screwed up. And the NCAA is like, no, that's not going to happen. So plenty of different Big Ten stuff to go over, but I guess I'll swing it back to you first, Troy. How has your day been?
Well, you know how my day is going. I do the show on the way home. I told the listeners last week, I'm not sure if I told them on this show, my car window is broken, and I did not get it fixed, and I thought, well, you know what, I can survive 1 week. Well, I am driving home in literally a torrential downpour, and my window is wide open, and so half of my body is soaked. And so I'm doing this show driving in a downpour. Don't worry, I'm safe. But I'm doing this show, and I'm getting soaked while I do it. It's like I won the World Series or I won the Super Bowl, and I'm getting doused with Gatorade. That's what it feels like today. So if I pause for a moment, it's just because I've got to wipe the rain off of my face and maybe off of my mouth. But it is actually getting so bad that I might have to pull over. Like, that's how bad this downpour is today. We don't get many of these in Western PA. So it's kind of cool, actually. But a great show, Kevin. AP poll comes out. I know we talked about me being a Badger fan. They're ranked number 9. Pretty generous in my book. Pretty generous to be ranked number 9. Good spot for them to start at. But let's just get into it. Let's go through this top 10. We can even go through more of the APs in the top 10. It comes out, I've told you my thought on this. I'm not a big fan of an AP poll coming out before a game has even been played.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess there's a couple points I wanted to make. I think Troy and I have been lying to you guys for, I guess, to an extent. We say that these polls are crap and they don't mean anything, yet they kind of do mean something, because if you're ranked number 2 in the AP poll, like Ohio State is to start, it means you have wiggle room in terms of losing a game or even 2 and then going through the Big Ten and winning the conference championship potentially. I think an Ohio State team this year with 2 losses that ends up winning the Big Ten, winning the Big Ten title game, if that were to somehow happen, they'd probably make the Final Four. So it doesn't matter where you start the year ranked. But I guess where we kind of, and I hadn't thought about this until I think it was yesterday, I was just thinking about football polling because that's the kind of sports nerd I am. But so the AP poll is separate from the College Football Playoff Committee. And the College Football Playoff Committee is actually what determines who determines the 4 teams are going into the College Football Playoff. They're 2 separate entities. They're 2 separate, I guess, committees, if you want to call them that. So I will say this, though, that a team like Ohio State, who's ranked number 2, as opposed to a team like West Virginia, who's ranked 22, you've got this College Football Playoff Committee having the AP poll and how prevalent it is and how everyone, uses the AP poll in terms of where these teams are. I mean, obviously, anyone who tries to guess where these teams are right now is going to be wrong on some sort of level, no matter what team it is. I mean, I think the last AP team, preseason team number 1 to go through the season and end up as the number 1 team, like the AP predicts in the preseason, I think the last time was like 06 or 07 when USC did it. And that's the last time. I mean, that's like 10, 11 years ago. So it basically never happens. You're going to be wrong on some level. But I think that the College Football Playoff Committee keeps things in mind like, hey, the majority of people who know a lot about college football think Wisconsin's the 9th best team in the country, for example. So you're going to have a preconceived notion that Wisconsin's a pretty dang good team. And if they only lose 1 game and win the Big Ten title game, then, okay, this team probably deserves to be in the Final Four if you're a College Football Playoff Committee member. Again, you're different than the AP, and the Associated Press's poll is just completely different from what the College Football Playoff rankings and, what that all entails, because that's what really matters at the end. And I love that the College Football Playoff Committee, their poll doesn't come out, their rankings, their first rankings don't come out until like November or something. It's really late. It's like 3 or 4 weeks left in the season. That's when they first release their rankings. Now, a lot can change in that last month or so of the season of college football, but they wait a long time, which I like. But this AP poll does matter in the sense of every committee member for the College Football Playoff Committee, which has the ultimate final say this college football season and for college football seasons going forward until something changes, you're going to have a preconceived notion that Wisconsin's a pretty dang good team. West Virginia is just fine. Ohio State should be dominant. So this poll does matter in a sense because it gives you a preconceived notion of how good these teams are supposed to be. There's no question that every College Football Playoff Committee member is going to look at the rankings next to Alabama, Ohio State, Florida State, Michigan, Wisconsin's name on a weekly basis up until their first rankings are revealed. So I just had to say that the College Football Playoff Committee and their rankings that don't come out for, a couple months now, 8 or 9 weeks into the season, that's what truly matters, not this AP poll. But I will say before sending it off to you, Troy, Ohio State's 2. Well, I'll say the top 11. Alabama's number 1, Ohio State 2 for Big Ten listeners. Florida State 3, USC 4, Clemson 5, Penn State, another Big Ten team at 6, Oklahoma 7, Washington 8, Wisconsin at 9. There's another Big Ten team. Oklahoma State 10, and number 11 is the 4th Big Ten team in Michigan. So Ohio State at 2, Penn State 6, Wisconsin 9, Michigan 11. That's all the top 25 teams in this AP poll from the Big Ten. 4 of them bunched in the top 11. So it's basically what Troy and I have been saying, that there's going to be 4 really good teams. Michigan and Wisconsin, to me, maybe a little overrated there, but, realistically, are there 11 better teams than Michigan? Are there, 10, 11, 12, 13 better teams than Wisconsin? Is Wisconsin vastly overrated? Should Wisconsin be probably 15th? Maybe. I guess I could make that argument. Troy probably agrees with that argument. But in the end, a few spots here and there, I have no gripes with it, especially considering, again, it's an AP poll, so it means something, but it doesn't mean everything down the stretch when the College Football Playoff Committee does end up revealing theirs, which actually determines the Final Four.
Well, I could be a Wisconsin homer and say, why aren't the Badgers ranked in the top 5? No, I'm with you, Kevin. Like I said, let's put it this way, though. I wasn't surprised that they got number 9 because of the way that they ended last year, Paul Chryst, the way that the program is run, the schedule they have, all these things kind of going into this number 9 ranking. but realistically, I don't think they're the ninth best team. I would put them in the middle teens, that 14, 15, 16 range. That's where I believe Wisconsin is. I'm realistic about it. You put this team with last year's schedule, and then I could see a number of blemishes on it. But with this team, we talked about it, the Wisconsin team, the way that their schedule rolls out, and we just said this on a different show last week, you can never apologize for the schedule, especially when it's a conference schedule. You know, and we use the example of the New England Patriots. Are they going to apologize because they play in the worst division in the NFL, and they got to play against the Jets and the Bills and the Dolphins? No, they're not going to apologize. That's just the way it rolls out. So is Wisconsin going to apologize for having a schedule that they have to play in the conference because it doesn't include the Ohio States and the Penn States this year? That's the way the Big Ten schedule rolled out. That's the way it is. So as a Badger fan, I want to put it this way, though, Kevin. Part of me is like, okay, well, it allows them to have an easier road to the Big Ten championship. But then there's a part of me that says, well, that kind of sucks because they're not really going to get tested. And how good is this team really going to be? A record could be 10-1, let's say, if they lose to Michigan. Let's say they win, they're 11-0. Are they really an 11-0 team? Because they really would not have been tested. So I wanted to get your thoughts there. These schedules, Kevin, that come out, and we'll use Wisconsin as an example. I really believe that this record could be inflated, but we're not going to know really how good Wisconsin is until they play a Michigan. And even if they lose to Michigan, they could still make the Big Ten title game. And then that's the second test, so only two tests to really see how good Wisconsin is. And they could be in that top 10 all year based on their schedule because they should keep winning. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I said this before the AP poll came out, from Vegas's standpoint and from my personal standpoint, and I have no rooting interest for Wisconsin one way or the other, typically, actually over the last, since I lived in Wisconsin, now I'm back in Florida as of a year ago, but, I've lived in the state of Wisconsin, and, the majority of my best friends are obviously Wisconsin Badger fans because of that. And so I just want to go against the grain from that perspective. So typically I'll root against Wisconsin if I've had a rooting interest whatsoever, just because it's just different as opposed to just going with, the entire crowd. And I, realistically couldn't care less one way or another. But going into this 2017 season, to get to my point, Wisconsin should be favored in every game. Week 3, they play at BYU. I've talked about that game. For the last month or so, that's going to be a game that is tougher than probably the average fan realizes, and I'm glad we're using Wisconsin as an example because this AP poll, they always have other teams receiving votes, and Northwestern, just to keep it in the Big Ten for a second, Northwestern would be ranked 31st if, the poll was to be extrapolated out, just in terms of votes and how many votes Northwestern got to be in the top 25. They were technically the 31st team with the most votes. Nebraska was 40th. Michigan State was 44th. But the team I wanted to mention was BYU. They're 38th. So they are one of those other teams receiving votes. And so, you can say 38th best team in the country going against the 9th best team in the country. It's, number 9 team should win no problem. But I think BYU is one of those other quality programs that, again, the AP poll, realistically, you take a snapshot of the top 25 preseason and compare it to the end of the season, and you're going to get 8-9 teams that were unranked, and they're going to end up in the top 25. And if BYU is one of those teams sitting there at number 19 at the end of the season, that wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. And I don't know the ins and outs of BYU and what they have returning from last year. I don't know much about BYU whatsoever personnel-wise, but I know the BYU program. And going to BYU after playing games against Utah State and Florida Atlantic, you're going to notice a difference if you're Wisconsin and a Wisconsin fan watching these games. There's a reason why it's being broadcast on ABC, ESPN. It's a bigger game. It's a BYU program that's never bad, and they always can put up points, and they always send guys to the NFL every single year. So it's not a, Boise State who wins 10, 11, 12 games every year when Boise State was in its prime, but it's that next level. It's a really good Group of 5 school, if you want to put it in terms of Power 5 conferences and Group of 5. BYU is a talented team. They're always respectable. Going to BYU and playing a game after a couple cupcakes is going to be a little difficult, but I expect Wisconsin to win. Then you have a bye. Then you play Northwestern at home. That'll be a hard game because Northwestern's solid, but you're coming off a bye at home. Then you go to Nebraska. That's going to be a real test. But Nebraska just lost their best defensive player to injury for the year. So that makes that game easier. And then from that point on, it's Purdue, Maryland, at Illinois, at Indiana. Then you get Iowa at home. You get Michigan at home. Then you end the season at Minnesota. So every single game, Wisconsin should be favored. And I'm with you, Troy. Finally, get to get to the point there that I'm with you. I mean, they've got 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. They've got 12 games on the schedule. They've got a bye, basically week 4. They could easily be 12-0 going into the Big Ten championship game, and not because Wisconsin's an average team with a terrible schedule. They're a good team, no question about it. But, I think like Troy and I are saying, they're probably around the 15th best team in terms of just pure talent. That's just our guess going into the year. It's everyone's guess as opposed to what these teams are going to be at the end of the year. But Wisconsin's a good team, no question about it, and they're at home against Michigan. They're at home against teams like Northwestern. Again, at BYU will be interesting. At Nebraska will be interesting. But Wisconsin realistically is the better team. They could be 12-0 as opposed to an Ohio State or a Michigan who's got 1 or 2 losses, Penn State with 1 or 2 losses. As everyone knows, you can't go strictly by record, but it again points out that schedules, even in the same conference, aren't even because of divisions and whatnot. So, and even, put all the teams in the same division from a conference, you still have the 3 or 4 non-conference games every single year that, again, Wisconsin could play LSU like last year, and Ohio State could play a bunch of cupcakes. Or Wisconsin could play a couple cupcakes and play BYU, who's a solid team, or you can be Ohio State, who's playing Oklahoma. I mean, schedules are never even. It's just never, no matter what sport you look at, what conference, what division, no matter what level of football or any sport, there is no perfect schedule that's just perfect where you play everyone that everyone else plays at their place and at your place. It's never 100% fair or even. So schedules are uneven. Wisconsin's got an easier one this year. That's just the way it breaks out.
Yeah, let's talk about Penn State coming in at number 6, Kevin. I mean, I saw some reaction, and there's some Penn State fans that think they got slighted a little bit and should be ranked a little bit higher. And with Penn State, they're going to be a good, solid football team. I figured they'd be in that range, maybe could have even slid up as high as 4 in my book. But with them coming in at 6 again, I've always said preseason polls to me mean absolutely nothing. And if we're going to use the word of the day, I think they're crap. I think they're crap, but they're so important when you're talking about the scope of college football that it has to be talked about. But for Penn State to come in at 6, I'm not going to argue with that. Are they the 6th best team in the country? I can argue that. If they would have came in at number 4, I would have been okay with that too. What do you think, Kevin? I know a lot of Penn State fans that are sitting there, and maybe some of them are just Penn State homers that thought they should have been ranked higher. Are you okay with Penn State at 6? Do you think they should have been higher?
I think based on what I know, and I'll keep this quick, that Alabama's going to be really good, but it's going to take them a little time, as always, to figure some things out in terms of bodies they lost to the NFL from the year before. And the same thing with Ohio State. They've got, I think, a dominant, one of the best D-lines from a top end and in the middle and depth perspective that you'll find in the last decade. Since 2000 could be the best D-line in college football history. I think that's how good Ohio State's D-line could be, which, as the Giants have shown in a couple Super Bowls, you can beat a Tom Brady Patriots team just because of your D-line. You know, if you get after the quarterback, and you're going up against Von Miller, and, you can be Peyton Manning, you can be Tom Brady, but if you're facing this ridiculous pass rush and you have no time, doesn't matter who you are. So that's how much the line of scrimmage matters, and Ohio State can dominate that against any team in the country. So Alabama's way up there in my mind. Ohio State's way up there in my mind. Florida State's got a lot of talent. Their quarterback's got a lot of talent. He's back. They're way up there in my mind. USC's got a lot of talent. Their quarterback, projected number 1 pick if he wants to come out, they're way up there in my mind. Penn State is way up there in my mind because they have a lot of talent as well. You have a really good quarterback and probably the best running back in college football. So Penn State's going to be able to score with anyone. They're way up there. I'm not going to say that Penn State should be ahead of USC or ahead of Florida State or ahead of Ohio State, Alabama, even Clemson at number 5. If I were to say something, and it's a 1-spot difference, that I think Penn State's better than Clemson. I think Oklahoma at 7, Washington at 8. Those teams are better than Clemson just because those teams are bringing back really good quarterbacks. And this is what I've said before, that a lot of the big brands in college football, Alabama, Ohio State, Florida State, USC, Penn State, Oklahoma, all these teams have really good quarterback play. And so I expect one of those teams to win the title. I think I can count it right now. Alabama, Ohio State, Florida State, USC, that's 4. Penn State 5, Oklahoma 6, Washington 7, and Oklahoma State brings back a really good quarterback. And because of their schedule, they've got a light one. Their offense is going to be nuts. So that's 8 teams, realistically, just because of the quarterback play on those 8 teams and everything surrounding it. That's 8 of your top 10 teams, according to the AP. There's no other team that has this ridiculous quarterback. Louisville you could throw out there, but their offensive line's shaky. Georgia's got a really talented quarterback, but going through the SEC, that really talented quarterback's only a sophomore. So none of these other teams are going to push teams like Oklahoma State, Washington, Oklahoma, Penn State, USC, Florida State, Ohio State, Alabama, just because of the quarterback play that they have, whether they're seniors or whether they're talented guys like Jalen Hurts at Alabama or DeAndre Francois at Florida State, Sam Darnold at USC, Trace McSorley at Penn State, Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma, Jake Browning at Washington, Mason Rudolph at Oklahoma State. That's just going down the line, 1 through 10. 8 of those teams are big brands, or not maybe necessarily Oklahoma State, but 6, 7 of those teams just have really good quarterback play, really good play around them. A big brand in college football, I think one of those 8 teams will win it all. If I were to say it just right now, but this was before the AP poll, I could have told you that. But there's a reason why all these teams toward the top have really good quarterback play. We think Wisconsin may be a little overrated because their quarterback play could be fine, but it's just not of the level of these other teams that I mentioned. Same thing with Clemson. You've got talented guys on the quarterback depth chart, but they're just not known commodities like Trace McSorley, Baker Mayfield, Jake Browning from Washington, Mason Rudolph from Oklahoma State. Those are all teams behind them, so I would vault them ahead of Clemson. But I guess to finally, and I said I would keep this short, but Penn State is in the same class of Alabama, Ohio State, Florida State, USC, Oklahoma, Washington this year. I think they've got a better team than Oklahoma State, but Oklahoma State's offense can just score with everyone, just like Ohio State's D-line can dominate any offensive line in one given game. So Ohio State can beat anyone this year in one given game. Oklahoma State can beat anyone just because of their offense. I think Penn State's in that same category. I think they're as talented, maybe slightly less talented than a team like Alabama or Ohio State, but you can't count out that offense to put up 40 against anyone, which it seems like in college football now, even if you're an Alabama defense, you go up against a good offense, good quarterback, whether it's Deshaun Watson or Tim Tebow or Cam Newton or Johnny Manziel, you're going to put up 40 against them, even against an Alabama defense. We see it year after year. So it's all about offense in college football, and it's about the quarterback and your system and how fast you can go. And I just think there are way too many good quarterbacks, and Penn State's in that class with these other top teams in the country.
Kevin, I have to ask, did Alabama get the number 1 ranking just based on prior history and recruiting class? Because they lost a ton of guys to the NFL. You mentioned they're going to have these growing pains, getting used to getting all these new guys on the field. Are they really the number one team in the country?
I guess you could make the argument that they are, because, again, you've got a good quarterback in Jalen Hurts. He's not unbelievable, but you're going to have a really strong offensive line like you always do at Alabama. And Bo Scarborough has shown that he's going to be a ridiculous running back at Alabama. He showed that last year. He's going to be this year. And then just defensively, you talked about recruiting classes. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. If you've got a ton of projected NFL talent, half of those guys can go bad, half of them can be good. And if you take half of the 5 stars that they've had over the last 2-3 years, that's a lot of bodies on the defense.
Well,
that's
and this is where I'm going to interrupt you, Kevin, because this is where I have my gripe.
Yeah.
You're putting Alabama at number 1 after, they had all these guys go to the NFL. And you're now putting new players into positions that have never played before. Some guys have played. But when you look at that starting lineup for the 2017 team comparative to the 2016 team, we don't know how good it's going to be. They've never played. So I'm looking at teams like a Penn State that are returning a ton of starters. And then I'm looking at other teams that are returning a ton of starters. I think they're more deserving of higher rankings because you know what you get. Now, could they go out and lay an egg? Certainly. Could these 5-star recruits that are on Alabama's team be the best? Sure. But my point here is they've not played a darn snap. I mean, they've played, some of them, but they're not the starter. And all of a sudden you're saying, well, by default, Alabama's the best team. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, and that's understandable. I think by the end of the year, I think Alabama can beat anyone. I think, those 8 teams that I mentioned can beat anyone for a different number of reasons. And realistically, I'd take Penn State's offense over Alabama's any day of the week this upcoming year, whether it's the first week or the last week. And I would take Florida State's offense over Alabama's probably week 1. And Florida State plays Alabama week 1. So that's going to be massive. That game's played in Georgia. That's September 2nd. That's a couple weeks from now, less than a couple weeks from now. So Alabama, Florida State, number 1 versus number 3, that's week 1. That's going to be huge. I personally would probably favor Florida State because I like their quarterback a little more. But if you're giving Nick Saban and Alabama all that time to prepare, it's going to be difficult to pick against a team like Alabama. But that's going to be a really good game. I hear what you're saying, though, that there's a lot of unproven talent at Alabama. There's a lot of unproven talent. Ohio State lost a ton of their secondary to the NFL. They lost 3 guys in the first, 15 picks from their secondary, but they've got all these 5 stars, coming in, even not just from this past offseason and that recruiting class, but, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. You've got, solid 4-star guys who have been learning under these NFL guys for the last 2 years. They've churned out 4 or 5, it could be even 6 guys from the secondary the last 2 years of the NFL. So you've got these guys finally waiting their turn, and they're seasoned, quote-unquote, juniors that are big recruits coming out of high school. They just had to sit for a year or two. And it's the same thing every year with Alabama. That's why you see these 1-year starters on defense, just, whoever the middle linebacker is for Alabama, they're a first-round pick. And whoever the top corner is for Alabama, they're a first-round pick. And it seems like it's the same way at Ohio State now with Urban Meyer. So there's a lot of unproven talent, and I'm with you. If you're talking proven talent, Penn State's probably the number 1 team in the country. They beat Ohio State a year ago. They return, again, a really good quarterback and the best running back in football. So Penn State, if they were number 1, I wouldn't have an issue with that. They're at number 6. Oklahoma at 7. They can outscore anyone. Washington can outscore anyone. They've got a lot of talent on defense returning. Oklahoma State's offense, like I mentioned, is going to be ridiculous. I mean, any of those teams, I think, in this top 10, and then you start having teams like Michigan who returns no one from a year ago in terms of just pure starters on defense. But even that's a little iffy to say, just because you've got a lot of guys like Rashawn Gary, for example, the number 1 recruit 2 years ago. He's a sophomore now. He wasn't technically a starter at Michigan, but he's going to be a starter now, and he's supposed to be one of the top defensive linemen in the country because he was a year ago, even though he didn't really start as a pure freshman. but he's the number one recruit from 2 years ago. So he's supposed to be Donovan. And that's where, Troy's talking about how do you know, if Rashawn Gary is going to be this immense, unbelievable D lineman. If he's not, then Michigan's defense could suffer, and you could see Michigan be in the 22nd best team in the country by the end of the year if they replace their defense poorly, but just based on recruiting. And that's why you can only take so much from these preseason polls, and Troy's been saying for a month and saying for a few months that I don't take anything until conference play starts, because you don't know until about week 4, week 5 what you really have with your roster. And even at that point, if you're Wisconsin, you play a couple cupcakes, then you go to BYU, say you struggle there, but you get a 4-point win. Okay, how good are you? Because you played a couple crap teams, and then you played BYU and you struggled, but maybe now you're a little better, so maybe you can compete with teams like Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. And you just don't know until probably halfway through the year, or realistically when the College Football Playoff Committee comes out with their rankings. And that's why I love how late those come out, because you really do have a solid feel for where a lot of these teams are. So teams like Clemson, you're projecting quarterback play and who's going to replace Deshaun Watson and how good he's going to be. But to say, that's why I said, to put Clemson over a team like Penn State is kind of ridiculous. To put them over Oklahoma, Washington, Oklahoma State, with the quarterbacks that those teams I just mentioned have, it's kind of crazy to put Clemson up there. But the 8 teams I mentioned in the top 10, you could flip them in any order you wanted to, and I wouldn't have any issue whatsoever, because you are projecting out a lot of talent, but 8 of those teams have really good quarterback play. That much I know.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that, probably the team with the worst quarterback play is those Wisconsin Badgers. I mean, I'm being a fair assessment about that. The Badgers are not known to have strong quarterback play, but they've got one heck of an offensive line, and they're going to have one heck of a running game. So I guess that's what holds them up there. So, Kevin, your Ohio State Buckeyes, number 2 in the country. Were you a little bit disappointed that they didn't get the number 1 nod?
No, because it's the preseason AP poll. And to be number 2, if you're Urban Meyer, you can sell to your guys, hey, they think we're the second best team in the country. Let's go kill everyone and prove that we're the best. There you go. So I'd rather be number 2 in this AP poll than number 1, to be honest, because, again, you're taking 4 teams. You're not taking 1 at the end of the season. And, again, this is the AP poll. It's not the college football playoff rankings. If Ohio State was number 5 in the college football playoff rankings, that's a heck of a lot different than number 4. Because, 1, you're either in the playoff, or if you're at number 5, you're out. So that's the difference between number 4 and 5. So this AP poll to be number 2 instead of number 1, I truly couldn't care less, and I'd rather be number 2 because you can sell to your guys, hey, they think we're worse than Alabama. Well, we're going to find out a lot about Alabama and Florida State week 1, but Ohio State gets to play Oklahoma as well early on in the year. I think it's week 2. So Ohio State's got a lot to prove being number 2, so I realistically would rather be number 2. Again, there's a difference between 4 and 5 at the end of the year just because of where the college football playoff lands. But number 1, number 2, like I said, if Ohio State was behind Oklahoma State and they were at number 7, number 8, it wouldn't really matter to me, because I think you can juggle a lot of these teams up at the top right now.
Well, Kevin, I think you made a great point about the College Football Committee, and I said I don't like these polls until they play games. I'm with you that I love that they put their rankings out late in the season. You have a good understanding of where teams are. But I still think there's some human bias in here. When I look at these rankings that come out, sometimes I don't understand them. Because you look at teams, and I think a lot of times, you mentioned it, I mentioned it, we can't watch every game every weekend. And so there's a lot of emphasis put on those records and where they were in the AP poll, and that's what I don't agree with, because I don't think those are the true teams. Like if somebody told me if there was a team, let's say it was Ohio State, let's say they lost to Michigan, lost to Penn State, and then they lose early in the season to Oklahoma, 3 losses. Does that mean they're not one of the best 4 teams at the end of the year? That's where I'm going with this. It's still based on record. And teams are saying, well, you lose 2 and you're done. You can go home. You lose 3 and you're automatically out. And again, just because you have 3 losses doesn't mean you're the worst team or not deserving of going to the college football playoff. And I'm going to use Ohio State as the example. They do play Michigan and Penn State this year, correct, Kevin?
Yeah.
So let's say they lose both those games, and then they lose to Oklahoma. That's 3 losses. No way they're getting in the college football playoff, right?
Even with 2, I don't think they do, unfortunately. But 3, it's automatic that you're done no matter what name brand you are.
Okay, so now I'm going to throw this hypothetical out there. Let's say they lose to Oklahoma on a last-second field goal. Let's say they lose to Penn State by a fluke call and there's a fumble that's returned for a touchdown. Let's say they're dominating Penn State and they lose by a field goal in overtime, or they lose in overtime. Does that mean that they're not deserving of going into the playoff? And I'm not even a Buckeye fan, but I'm using that as an example to make my point. They could have outplayed all 3 of those teams, and something fluky happens in all 3. Now, people will argue with me and say, well, they should have taken care of business. And I can agree to you to a point, but that doesn't mean on that given day or over the course of a season that Ohio State is not one of the top 4 teams in the country just because they lost to those 3 teams. Does that make any sense to you, or am I just rambling off in left field here today?
No, and this is why people like March Madness in certain ways, is because it is a one-and-done format, and you can have Butler go on a 5-game winning streak, and boom, you're in the national championship game. And it's Butler. Was Butler the second-best team in the country back-to-back years when they made it to the championship game? Probably not. But all you have to do is win 1 game against the team. And anything can happen in 1 game, in 40 minutes of play, or in 60 minutes of play in football. It doesn't matter what sport. In 1 game, a lot of crap can happen. And like I said, if Ohio State loses 2 of those 3 games, Penn State, Michigan, and Oklahoma. I mean, you can beat Michigan at the end of the year and lose to Penn State and Oklahoma, and I think they're done. Because that's 2 losses. And no matter how you shake it out, I mean, you're praying that the Big 12 winner or the Pac-12 winner has 2 losses. Because if USC or Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, who you lost to, or even if you beat, and Oklahoma State makes it, and they're the best team coming out of the Big 12, and they've got 1 loss, you're easily taking Oklahoma State as a 1-loss team over Ohio State as a 2-loss team, because you've got Oklahoma thrown in there. It's not like Oklahoma State's playing nobody. So, and the Big 12 has a championship game this year. So it's the same for every conference. I mean, you've got to have a lot of help if you're a 2-loss team to make it when there's 5 big conferences. I mean, you're praying that another major conference winner and obvious best team loses 2 games alongside you. So 1 fluky play. I mean, you can lose to Oklahoma by 7, and then 1 fluky play costs Ohio State against Penn State, like it did a year ago. Not to say that the fluky play happened, but you can lose by 3 points to Penn State, and no one would laugh at you. But at the end of the day, you're sitting there 10-2, and Oklahoma State's 11-1, winners of the Big 12. You're picking Oklahoma State because of their offense and because they only lost 1 game as opposed to Ohio State losing 2. So if you lose 2 games, you're in a ton of trouble, not even 3, just 2 of them. So that's what happens with 1-game scenarios, and you can beat a team in any given week, even if you're an inferior team, but at the end of the day, that other team can be better. And a lot of people thought Ohio State was better than Penn State, even though Penn State a year ago beat Ohio State and won the Big Ten championship game, and Penn State was left out of the college football playoff because the perception was that Ohio State was still the better team, even though they lost by 3 points at Penn State earlier in the year. So it all has to do with perception, and which goes back to the AP rankings, giving the college football playoff committee a perception that Wisconsin's the 9th best team in the country, not 15th, or that Ohio State's the 2nd best team in the country as opposed to 6th, or that Oklahoma's number 7 as opposed to number 1, like maybe they should be. But we don't know that until all the games are played. But even if and when all the games are played, a fluky play can happen, and you can't know if Ohio State beats Oklahoma by 2 points in Columbus. That's a pretty damn good loss if you're Oklahoma to go into Columbus and lose by 2 points. So that is almost seen as a win to me. It's incredibly impressive if you go to Columbus and win, if you're Oklahoma, but if you lose by 2 points or a last-second field goal, that's an unbelievable loss. So everything has to be weighted, and it's all about perception, unfortunately. And one game here or there, it doesn't tell you the whole story, but that's why college football is exciting on a week-to-week basis in the fall, because every single game matters and perception matters, and it's all unfair, but we only have 12 games to prove to yourself to a committee that you belong in the top 4 at the end.
That's why I like our idea of having the 4 teams per conference, Kevin. That's why I like it, because now I'll throw another scenario at you. In that division, you've got Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. 3 good teams. I would say, and I don't think many people are going to argue with me, Penn State and Ohio State are probably both better than Wisconsin. The rankings say it, and you know how I feel about rankings. They're like dog crap. I had to throw the word of the day out again. But in my scenario, just what you were saying, on any given day, anybody can beat anybody. So let's say Wisconsin cruises through their schedule, gets to the Big Ten championship game, and the Penn State or Ohio State have one loss in the regular season, and either one of them, whatever one you want to pick, goes to that Big Ten championship game, and Wisconsin catches lightning in a bottle and beats them. Well, Wisconsin's probably going to the playoffs. And that means that Ohio State or Penn State team with 2 losses, probably on the outside looking in. Again, I don't agree with it. I mean, now, again, I'm assuming, and we all know what happens when you make assumptions, but I'm assuming everything stays status quo as far as rosters go and the quality of play. And if that stays the same, Ohio State and Penn State are both better than Wisconsin. But in my scenario I just gave you, Wisconsin would go to the playoffs, and that would leave one of the better teams at home watching from the couch. What are your thoughts there?
No, yeah. I mean, in short, it's just what I just said. I mean, it's unfair to base who deserves to be in the Final Four on a 12-game unfair schedule. That's just the way it is. Ohio State can kick the crap out of everyone, lose by a field goal to Michigan, and so you've got one loss, and that's your last week of the season. You lost a game. Okay, Ohio State was the number 1 team because they were killing everyone, then they lost to Michigan. Okay, so knock them down to 2 or 3. Wisconsin, let's say they lose one game. Let's say they lose to Michigan, but Ohio State has the tiebreaker because Michigan randomly loses twice. So Ohio State gets in from the division they're in because of just their record, and they have 1 loss instead of Michigan's 2. And Wisconsin's got 1 loss, and so you've got these 2 one-loss teams representing the Big Ten in the championship game. And even though everyone supposedly knows that Ohio State's the more talented team, Wisconsin wins by a crazy blocked field goal at the end of the game, and whatever happens. And so you've got this quote-unquote less talented team in Wisconsin with 1 loss, and they beat Ohio State at the end of the year. So they proved, quote-unquote, again, it's a 1-game thing. So you can't know for sure. It's not a 7-game series. It's not a 39-game series where you can truly know who the best team is. But Wisconsin can have 1 loss, have beaten Ohio State. They're the Big Ten representatives in terms of being the best team in the Big Ten over the course of the season and the conference championship game. And so, yeah, Wisconsin with 1 loss would get in over an Ohio State with 2 losses, so to say, even though Wisconsin has a much easier schedule than Ohio State or Penn State or Michigan, just because of how the divisions are lined up in the Big Ten. And that's going to change over the course of the next 20, 30 years, based on who's really good and where coaches go.
Yeah, they need to take our playoff scenario, Kevin. Top 2 teams out of each division. That's what they need to do. That's what they really need to do.
Yep.
Because I just threw out a scenario that could very well play out this year in the Big Ten. And, again, it's not going to be every year, and there's going to be that year where there's only 1 dominant team in that whole conference, and the other 3 participants in the postseason probably didn't deserve to be there. And so what happens when they win, or if they win? Well, then there's the flip side of the coin. But I just think the way that it is right now, it is unfair. But I think we beat that subject down into the ground, Kevin. I really want to touch on this Indiana thing because I actually have examples of when I coached where this happened to me as a coach, but I'm going to let you fill the listeners in. an ineligible player in Indiana based on academics, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I'm basically going to go through this article, and this is one of tons of articles that you can go through about this. But basically a 4-star, I believe he was, recruit coming out, a 4-star going to Indiana, or a really strong 3-star. I forgot what the case was with this kid, but a defensive back, Bryant Fitzgerald, who is an incoming freshman for Indiana. Basically, negligence from Indiana is costing him his first year of eligibility. And so basically the school didn't properly advise him on what he needed to do in order to play at Indiana. So the athletic director said it's the school's fault. The athletic director at Indiana is saying that it's the school's fault that this kid can't play. They basically just did not advise him correctly. And so whatever the case is, whether it's not taking a 4th year of science or a 3rd year of science in high school, or whether it's a GPA issue, or whether it's that he didn't do his 10 hours of community service that in high school he didn't know he needed to do, but to play at Indiana you needed to have 10 hours of community service. I don't know what the exact detail was. It could be academics. It could be community service. It could be not getting in trouble. It could be not getting a detention in high school one time. I have no idea what the detail is in particular, but whatever the case is, Indiana didn't let him know of what he needed to do to participate in Indiana. So here's a quote from the athletic director. He said, Bryant Fitzgerald, who's the kid, is a smart, outstanding young man who is academically prepared and capable of being very successful in Indiana. His ineligibility is not his fault, it's ours. On behalf of myself, this is the athletic director talking, and everyone associated with Indiana athletics, I personally apologize to Bryant and his family for our mistake. While it was an isolated and unintended one, it is no less devastating to Bryant, and I could not feel worse about it. That's what the athletic director said. He said the school screwed up in telling Bryant, hey, here's what you need to do in order to play football in the fall at Indiana. So, again, I don't know if it's a detention issue because he had too many detentions. I don't know if it's a GPA issue. I don't know if he flunked too many classes. I don't know if he didn't take enough math credits at his high school. I don't know what the case was in particular, the strict detail, but Indiana eventually tried to appeal it to the NCAA saying, hey, we screwed up, let this kid play, and the NCAA denied that appeal. They said, no, you screwed up, this kid can't play. So that's basically the whole story in a nutshell.
Well, I want to know, Kevin, why he's ineligible to play. I told you off the air that every NCAA player, Division I, II, or III, needs to go through NCAA. I don't think Division III has to. And they might have to. They have to go through what's called NCAA clearinghouse. And there are requirements for the clearinghouse. There are certain subjects you have to take. There's foreign language requirements. There's English requirements, math requirements, academic requirements for the clearinghouse. And if you don't meet those requirements, you are deemed ineligible by the NCAA. And so for Indiana to say, well, it's our fault, I'm not buying it. And the reason I'm not buying it, Kevin, is because I was a college coach, and I have been firsthand behind the desk where I've gotten a letter from the NCAA stating that one of my players did not clear the clearinghouse based on not enough credits completed in high school. Now, that doesn't mean that his diploma is not valid. It is. He graduated high school. But for the NCAA clearinghouse, he did not meet the specific requirements for the NCAA to be eligible to play. I put it right back on the high school. Why are you not advising a student athlete who has been there, talking to you as an advisor, saying, I want to play college athletics, what do I need to do to be eligible to play? It is not locked behind a steel door, Kevin. You can go to the NCAA Clearinghouse website. You can go look on it. You should be signing in as an underclassman in high school, looking at the requirements. To me, that is the high school's fault. And when it happened to me when I was coaching, I was pretty livid And my phone call to the academic advisor, I wasn't unprofessional. I didn't get mad. I didn't yell. But I asked a simple question: why? Why are you not advising student athletes of what they need to do in high school to be eligible to play college athletics? It is very simple. Log into the Clearinghouse website and see what the eligibility requirements are, and make sure all of your student athletes are meeting these requirements. And if you're getting a kid late, a junior going into his senior year, and he needs more credit, find some way for him to take them at a community college, find some way to get them into his class schedule, drop a class, add a class. I put that on the academic advisor, Kevin. I think in high school, I think a lot of these kids get lost in the shuffle. And I'll put it bluntly, I think some of these advisors don't care. And then all of a sudden they apply to the Clearinghouse, and bam, boom, they're ineligible because they didn't take enough math credit. I'm done ranting. You got me all going again on the show because I had it happen to me. But what are your last thoughts on this? I mean, we really can't dig into it any more than, stating facts. The kid's ineligible. But what are your thoughts after what I said and going all the way down to the high school level, thinking that, hey, I know I'm going to play college athletics, and I'm talking to my advisor, prepare me. Get me ready to play college athletics, please.
Yeah, it could have been Indiana's fault in that they didn't tell the high school advisor, hey, this is what he needs to do, whether it's community service or 4 math classes or whatever the case is or was. It could have been Indiana's fault. Or, it, like Troy said, it very well could have been the high school academic advisor's fault in trying to help this Bryant Fitzgerald kid. And he committed to Indiana January of last year. So, I mean, that's 19 months ago, something like that, 20 months ago, he committed to Indiana. So there was plenty of time, whether it was, hey, you need to take an extra half credit of math, or, hey, you need to get 10 hours of community service, or you can't get another detention, otherwise you can't play at Indiana. Whatever the case was, the particular detail, like Troy said, we can't talk about this really more because we just don't know.
Well, Kevin, I'm going to throw this out there. You were talking, and there's another caveat to this. And if it falls on the kid for GPA, my example, I had a brilliant kid. The kid had like a 3.5 or 3.6 in high school, and it wasn't GPA based. It was based on, it was a half credit. It was like a half credit of math or a half credit of science, something silly like that. And we appealed it, and of course we got denied. But in that Clearinghouse, there's a section you have to maintain a certain GPA in those core requirement subjects also. So we don't know the whole story on this kid. Maybe he didn't meet the GPA requirements for those core classes for the Clearinghouse. And if that's the case, well, then it's on the kid. But somebody did need to notify him. And I'll tell you what, that's the hardest conversation to have as a coach. When I had to tell this kid who had shown up on my campus, and now granted, he committed to me late, didn't apply for the Clearinghouse early. It was a late Clearinghouse. And so part of that I do put on the kid, but I had to sit there, bring this kid in my office after he was allowed to practice because it was still pending, but it came back he was ineligible. And at that point, I had to pull him off the field. Kevin couldn't even suit up, couldn't even practice. When you're ineligible through the Clearinghouse, you can't even practice. It's like you're not even on the team. So I wanted to throw that caveat out there that if it could be on the kid, too, that he didn't meet a GPA requirement in those core classes that are required for the Clearinghouse. There's so many little caveats to the Clearinghouse. And so if you're a high school athlete listening to this, I want to throw this out there, Kevin. You need to log into the Clearinghouse tonight. If you plan on playing college athletics at any level, log into the Clearinghouse tonight to make sure that your academic path in high school is being met. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. There are so many different avenues that this potentially could have went down. We just don't know what it is. Could have been the kid's fault, could have been Indiana's fault, could have been someone in high school's fault. We have no idea. But he's retaining his full scholarship. That much is known. He's, supposedly staying at Indiana. He's got his full scholarship. Like Troy said, though, there's no playing and there's no practicing in 2017. So it just sucks. And no matter whose fault it is, especially if it's not the kid, then it really sucks. If it's the kid's fault, obviously, it is what it is, But if it's not his fault, I mean, it just completely sucks. There's no other word for it. There are two other things I wanted to touch on, Troy. One of them is the James Franklin contract, which I think we'll do to end the show. But the next thing I wanted to point out to you, and I'm laughing because I can sense your response to what I'm going to say. But this broke out, I think it was half an hour ago or so, 40 minutes ago. The news broke out, and we talked about this on last week's show, future scheduling, and hey, Wisconsin's scheduling, so-and-so team for 2020 and 2021, isn't it cool that, I think it was Notre Dame. They scheduled Notre Dame, I believe it was for 2020 and 2021, and it's like, okay, it's, 3-4 years from now, at least it's Notre Dame, it's a big brand, that's all you can do is schedule big brands. Hats off to Wisconsin for doing that. Well, news came out like half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, that Wisconsin and UCLA agreed to play each other a home-and-home series at the Rose Bowl one year and at Camp Ramble the next year. And guess when those games are going to be played, Troy?
2050.
You're pretty close. It's 2029 and 2030. So that's 12 and 13 years from now.
I may not even be around to see that, Kevin. I may not even be around to see that. That's ridiculous. I understand you got to schedule. I do. I understand. I understand that scheduling concept. You got to schedule these games. But, man, to make that, I mean, I guess you're looking at it, again, two brands, two big-time brands, Wisconsin, UCLA. I mean, you're talking potential Rose Bowl matchups of the past. I mean, that's cool. But, man, I mean, I may not even be around in 2029.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also bring it up for the fact that, oh, hey, look, Wisconsin's got this poor schedule in the non-conference. Well, and you can't make the case that they thought Florida.
I don't even think the recruits are alive right now. I don't think the recruits are alive that will be playing in that game.
Their recruits.
Oh, no, they'd be alive. They'd be alive.
Yeah, they'd be alive.
From now. So they're like 6 years old right now. So there's a
right.
6-year-old going out there. I want to go to Wisconsin because they're playing UCLA. I'm going. I'm gonna take my Pee-wee helmet, I'm gonna put it on, and I'm gonna go smash my head on the wall because I'm so excited that Wisconsin's playing UCLA, and I'm going to commit to Wisconsin tonight.
Hey, I've seen kids around the age of 5, 6 sign scholarships to play places. Whether it's LeBron's kid signing a scholarship to go to play at Ohio State or whatever the case is, or Chris Carter's kid. I'm just using crap examples, but. Yeah, these kids get scholarships at a young age, and I must say I don't think there has been a kid that has said, I'm committing to Wisconsin even though I'm 12 years old, because they're going to be playing UCLA in the Rose Bowl, 8 years from now, 10 years from now. I don't think that's ever come out. But, again, I guess hats off to Wisconsin for playing a UCLA brand and program that should be at least okay. And so I guess it'll be a cool atmosphere. Hopefully you're around to see it, Troy. But
hopefully we're still doing our show. I hope we're still doing our show in 2029, and maybe we can actually go to the game, because by that time I would hope that we're on a bigger platform. But really, I don't know if I'll be around. I'm an old man.
Yeah, just wanted to throw that out there because of how in the future it was. And I guess I wanted to bring that point out again, because you don't know how the schedules are going to work out. And even, the year of or the year before, you start having to make schedule changes because the team has to play, wants to play you and you want to play them, but they can only play you week 2 of 2029. And so you end up having to bounce that UCLA game, 2 years into the future. I mean, none of this stuff is truly set in stone until, basically the schedules are locked, which I think happens of that year. But it's just you don't know how schedules are going to play out. That's why schedules are so uneven. UCLA could be the number one team in the country with the number one quarterback. Josh Rosen this year for UCLA, the huge quarterback recruit, could be the number one pick in the country for the 2018 draft. Wisconsin-UCLA would be a huge game. Even though UCLA is not a great team, it would be an awesome test for Wisconsin to play UCLA. But, 5 or so years ago, UCLA wasn't that good. But, to project out to 2029, 2030, all you can do is schedule teams that have a big brand, and you hope that they've got the right coach and the right quarterback, and boom, you're playing the top 10 team in the country. So I guess that's all you can ask for realistically. I've got nothing more on that until we move over to the James Franklin news and his new contract.
Yeah, well, it's a great day to be James Franklin, or it's a great week to be James Franklin, I'll tell you that. A big extension signed. Originally, when it came out, I heard it wrong, and originally it was like $50 million, but I believe it's a 6-year, $35 million deal, Kevin. Is that correct? Are those the numbers?
Yeah, technically a 6-year extension, $34.3 million, $5.73 million annually. Basically, he's making over $5 million a year. He's the 5th highest paid coach in the country, which is what I wanted to get to with this. That James Franklin's done a heck of a job at Penn State, and again, Penn State's the number 6 team in the country. I said they should be ranked higher. I think they can compete with anyone. I think they could win a national championship this year. This is coming fresh off, the sanctions that Penn State just had to deal with, and yet I think they could be the best team in the country in 2017.
Yeah.
So James Franklin's done a heck of a job. But he's
deserving of a contract extension for sure, Kevin, but I think he's the 5th best coach in college football. I don't think he deserves to be paid at $35 million for 6 years. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't have been compensated for what he's done. I think he's done a heck of a job, and players have bought into his system. But I look at all this money being thrown around. I don't think he's, like I said, I don't think he's the 6th or the 5th best coach in America. And it's unfair. I know that when you look at it, that the boosters are like, man, we can't lose this guy. He rejuvenated our program. He's done a lot of good things. He's a good young coach, and he is. And they didn't want to lose him. It's hard to find a good coach, so you're going to overpay. It's the way the world of sports goes in today's world, Kevin. People overpay. And I look at this money. He's making more money than a lot of NFL coaches. And quite frankly, no pun intended on James Franklin, I don't think he'd make it in the NFL. And so he's getting paid better than or higher than many NFL coaches who I believe, when you're looking at it, have a great skill set. But do they do a lot of coaching there? No. And people argue college coaches deserve more because they actually coach and recruit. But I don't think Franklin deserved to be one of the top 5 paid coaches in America. That's how I'm going to leave it with you.
I don't know if he's the 5th best coach, and so he should be paid the 5th highest. I think that Jimbo Fisher should be paid more. I think Urban Meyer, Nick Saban should be paid more. I think there's an argument with James Franklin and Jim Harbaugh because neither of them have gotten to a college football playoff and done damage and won a national title. So I guess it's to be determined there. Dabo Swinney at Clemson's done a heck of a job at Clemson, taking Clemson to be a perennial top 5 team, whether you've got a Deshaun Watson or not. It seems like Clemson's always getting respect, and they're always getting top-notch talent in recruiting. And that's at least half the battle. So I think you can throw Dabo Swinney's name in there. I think, James Franklin, regardless, if you're the 7th best coach or 8th best coach, like maybe Troy and I think he is in the grand scheme of things, Chris Peterson at Washington should easily be up there as well with what he did at Boise State and now what he's doing at Washington. Now Washington's humming, and they're a top 10 team annually now. So there are 10 probably really, really strong coaches, whether James Franklin's 5th or 8th or 10th, whatever the case is. Again, he's a young head coach. He rejuvenated the program. And, ultimately it's kind of how I look at the top 10 in the AP poll for this year, that you could chuck Oklahoma State, who's number 10, and put them at number 2, and I would have no gripe on that. because their offense and what they're going to have on offense, they deserve to be potentially number 2. They could win the whole thing. I think Oklahoma State could win the college football playoff in 2017 because of their offense. And I think James Franklin, he could outcoach Nick Saban in one game. I think Penn State could beat Alabama for sure. Like I said earlier on this show, I think Penn State, I would take Penn State over Alabama right now because of what you're getting in quarterback and running back, as opposed to Alabama where you're getting a sophomore quarterback, you're getting a young running back, you don't know what you're getting defensively. It's just a bunch of hype on recruits. So I think Penn State's better than Alabama week 1. I don't know about week 14, 15, but I think James Franklin's done a heck of a job. He deserves to get paid, I think, as much as probably these other coaches. And as far as the comparison with the NFL goes, whether you want to say college coaches deserve more than the NFL or not, because, hey, they have to deal with recruiting, they have to deal with a lot more sanctions. In the NFL, if a guy kills someone or, whatever the case is, you can just say, hey, boom, you're cut, you're done. There's non-guaranteed contracts, you're off the team. And in college, you can get a ton of scrutiny, and it's the same for the NFL, but there's just a lot more crap that's thrown on you, it seems like, in college off the field than the NFL. In the NFL, it's like you can practice whenever you want, you play every Sunday, and your life is football. And if you're a college coach, there's so much crap that you have to deal with, not even just on your team and not even just scouting other teams, but going across the country and flying to Texas and flying to California and flying up to Canada or flying to Mexico, flying to Australia to see a punter play. There's so much extra crap that college coaches have to deal with. That's why, to me, if a college coach like James Franklin makes more than an NFL coach, coaching the Arizona Cardinals, let's say, and I'm not going to get into specific coaches, but, coaching an average team like the Dolphins. I mean, James Franklin and how much money he brings in for Penn State football because of where they are, being a top 10 team, making the Rose Bowl, that gives Penn State a ton of money. The Miami Dolphins are just hovering around 500 every single year. So, does the Miami Dolphins coach deserve more money than James Franklin just because he's at a higher level? Maybe he should. Under my, thoughts on it, I think James Franklin does more for Penn State than the average coach does, than the Miami Dolphins head coach does if you threw him out and threw an average coach in the Dolphins. So I think James Franklin is worth probably more than whoever the coach in Miami is or whoever the coach in, San Diego is, or because those teams just don't get a ton of extra money for their owners, I guess, in the NFL because of what the head coach is doing, like James Franklin's doing at Penn State. So to me personally, I think he should be paid more than some NFL coaches just because of how much money he's bringing into the program. That's just how I look at it.
Kevin, my thing with coaches is they give them all this money, and then the minute they have a bad year, they're out the door. I'm really one of these guys where I like the earn your keep type thing. So, you give coaches, you give them a salary, and then all this extra TV revenue. We talk about the NCAA and the greed. I think that's how you work out some of these contracts with coaches. For example, there's a bonus, and I'm sure he has bonus money in there if he makes the Rose Bowl, but or the national championship series. But I guarantee that it's pennies on the dime for what the college is going to get. If I'm an agent, I'm like, I want a percentage of that. I don't want $1 million bonus. I want a percentage of, because the percentage of that is going to be more than $1 million. But this is one of those topics, Kevin, we could go round and round and not come to an agreement on, or anybody in the world for that matter. But other than that, is there any other topics that you have for tonight?
No, the biggest news, really, James Franklin gets paid a lot. This Indiana, kid and his situation is certainly an interesting story, and Wisconsin and their future scheduling endeavors for when Troy is hopefully alive. That's all fun, but the big, quote-unquote news is the AP poll. I've got nothing new. Again, Ohio State's number 2, Penn State 6, Wisconsin 9, Michigan 11. That's why I've been saying since this show started in January when we just talked about basketball every single show, Big Ten football is the best conference in football. It's not the SEC, just because they have more talented bodies, according to NFL scouts, maybe, on an annual basis. But if you have Michigan sending the most kids to the NFL draft a year ago, I think that speaks for Michigan. And I think it speaks of Michigan and Jim Harbaugh to lose all those kids and still be number 11, or Wisconsin without this crazy hyped quarterback to still be number 9, or to be Penn State at number 6 and Ohio State at number 2, and to have 3 other Big Ten teams receiving votes. It just, the Big Ten in general, from a football perspective, is at its best right now, and the coaching is a huge reason why. That leads to recruiting. That leads to basically stuff, performance on the field, and it's not all recruiting, as we've said in the past with Wisconsin. The offensive linemen, running backs they get aren't these 5 stars left and right, but what Wisconsin does on an annual basis, hats off to that program and what they're doing. I just love Big Ten football right now because there are so many interesting and good coaches and teams, and it's going to be a fun football season because of how good these teams, 4 of the top 11 teams in the country, according to the Associated Press, are in the Big Ten. Absolutely no other conference can speak to that level.
Nope. There you have it, folks. Another Go Big or Go Home episode in the books for the youngster Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter. I am Old Man Troy. You can find me on Twitter at TroyRobert967. Join us next week, talking more Big Ten. Have a good day, everyone.